A beautiful day to everyone. I hope all my learners are doing great and making the best use of their time. Dear learners, today I'm going to take up the third chapter of Class 7's Honeycomb. The chapter is titled as Gopal and the Hilsa Fish. Let us take a quick glance at the content of the presentation. We'll begin with the introduction, then we'll move to the characters, then we'll take up the word meaning, then we'll see the explanation, then we shall discuss the summary, and finally we shall end the presentation with a conclusion. The chapter Gopal and the Hilsa Fish is in the form of a comic strip with a humorous narrative. So what is a comic strip? I believe you're well acquainted with the concept. But still, let me tell you what a comic strip is. A comic strip is a series of adjacent images usually arranged horizontally to read as a narrative. And I also feel that you must have gone through some comic strips in newspapers and magazines. Let us learn about the characters of the story. Well, we have the king, Gopal, Gopal's wife, and these three are the main characters. Then we have some other characters like the courtiers, palace guards, villagers, and the fishmonger. Now, let us learn about the meanings of certain words used in the chapter. The first word is fishmonger. A fishmonger is someone who sells raw fish. Then the next word is downcast, which means looking down. The third word is temper, which means a particular emotional state or mood. Then smearing, which means covering with something. Then disgraceful, which means shameful. The next word is rags, which means old and torn clothes. Then the next word is comical, which means funny. Then the next word is mystic, which means a spiritual person or a seer. Then the last word is ridiculous. Ridiculous means absurd or comical. Let us begin with the reading of the narrative. It was the season for Hilsa Fish. Fishermen could think of nothing but Hilsa Fish. So, we see that there was an obsession for Hilsa Fish since the beginning of the story. Fishmongers sold nothing but Hilsa Fish. So, here there is a fishmonger who is calling the customers. Come, buy, the price of Hilsa is down today. Householders could talk of nothing but Hilsa Fish. So, even the householders just discussed about Hilsa Fish. So there is a conversation between two people here. How much did you pay for that, Hilsa? You wouldn't believe if I told you. And in the king's palace, the courtiers could discuss nothing but Hilsa Fish. Your Majesty, you should have seen the huge Hilsa I caught. It was... So we see that even the courtiers were talking about the Hilsa Fish. The moment the king heard about the Hilsa Fish from a courtier, he got angry. He said, "Stop it! Are you a courtier or a fisherman?" And the courtier fell silent with downcast eyes. The king felt guilty. So the king at once realized that he shouldn't have screamed at the courtier. He said, "I am sorry. I lost my temper. It is the season for Hilsa Fish, and no one, not even Gopal, can stop anyone from talking about Hilsa Fish, not even for 5 minutes." So he was angry because everybody around him was talking about Hilsa Fish. And he said even the courtier Gopal could not stop anyone from talking about Hilsa Fish, not even for 5 minutes. And what does Gopal say? He says, "Oh, I think I could, Your Majesty." So the king now throws him a challenge. "Then let me see you buy a huge Hilsa and bring it to the palace without anyone asking you a word about it." And Gopal accepts the challenge. He says, "I accept the challenge, Your Majesty." Let's see what happens a few days later. There is a conversation between Gopal's wife and Gopal. She asks him, "Why is your face half shaven?" And Gopal responds, "I am dressing up to buy a fish." "What's the matter with you? Why are you smearing yourself with ash?" "I told you I am dressing up to buy a Hilsa Fish." "Listen to me. Please, you can't possibly go out in those disgraceful rags. What are you up to?" How many times must I tell you, woman, I'm out to buy a huge Hilsa fish? It's happened to him. He's gone mad. So we see that a few days later, Gopal's wife was annoyed to see that Gopal has half shaven his face and he was smearing himself with ash. And to whatever she asked, he only responds by saying that he was dressing up to buy a Hilsa fish. She runs after him, she stops him from going out in those shameful torn clothes, and she wants to know what was he up to. But Gopal just responds by saying that how many times he had to tell that he was going to buy a huge Hilsa fish. And finally, she assumes that he has turned mad. Now let us see what happens next when Gopal goes out in the village with his weird look. Gopal bought the Hilsa fish and started walking towards the palace. A child looks at him and says, "Mother, look at that man, isn't he comical?" So the child finds him funny. And then there is a conversation between the villagers. They say, "He must be a madman." "Hush, I think he's a mystic." So someone assumes him to be a crazy person, whereas the other person thinks he must be a spiritual person who has given up all the worldly things. So he's calling him a mystic. What happens when Gopal reaches the court? The palace guards, they stop him. They ask him, "What do you want?" And Gopal says, "I want to see the king." The soldiers, they respond by saying, "You can't see the king. Get away with you." And Gopal, just to draw the attention of people, starts to dance and sing loudly. Let us see what was happening inside the palace when Gopal was busy with his antics outside. So there are some sounds that are coming. "The man is crazy. Throw him out at once. I want to see the king. Let me in." So people are calling Gopal as crazy, but then Gopal is adamant on meeting the king. So the king orders the guard, "Bring that man to me at once." To which the guard says, "Yes, your majesty." And Gopal was brought before the king. One of the courtiers happened to identify him. He said, "It's Gopal." Then the other courtier said, "The man has lost his mind." To which the third courtier said, "I think it's one of his crazy jokes." In the next scene, we see that Gopal was brought before the king. So the king says, "All right, Gopal, out with it. Why are you dressed up in this ridiculous fashion?" To which Gopal says, "Your Majesty, you seem to have forgotten something." The king is unable to recall. What has he forgotten? And he says, "Forgotten something?" And Gopal responds, "Strangely enough, no one seems to be interested in Hilsa fish today. From the market to the palace and in the court, not a soul has spoken a word about Hilsa fish." So we see that Gopal has done all these antics just in order to divert the attention of people. Only then did the king remember the challenge that he had thrown to Gopal. And he said, "Ha ha, well, Gopal, congratulations. You have achieved the impossible once again." So we see that Gopal has been able to fulfill the challenge. Let us recapitulate the story through the summary. During the season of Hilsa fish, everybody seemed to be obsessed with it. Even in the court, when a courtier talked about Hilsa fish, the king rebuked him. The king was annoyed because everybody around him talked only about it, and he felt that even the courtier Gopal was unable to stop people from doing so. To which Gopal said that he could do it. The king then threw a challenge at Gopal to bring a huge Hilsa fish to the palace without any person asking a word about it. Gopal accepted the challenge. After a few days, Gopal half shaved his face, smeared himself with ash, and wore rags before going to buy Hilsa fish. His wife tried stopping him, but he snubbed her and went out. When he went to the marketplace, people found him crazy. He went to the palace and began his antics outside. The king ordered the guard to bring him inside the palace. And Gopal went inside with the huge Hilsa fish that he bought. The king then asked Gopal about his crazy look, and Gopal then reminded him about the challenge. The king laughed and congratulated Gopal for winning the challenge. So we see that Gopal had dressed up that way and behaved weirdly just in order to attract the attention of people towards him so that he could win the challenge. So let us see what are we going to conclude from this story. The humorous story tells us that whenever you are thrown a challenge or you are stuck in a difficult situation, you need to think out of box. That means you need to think differently in order to win the challenge or to overcome the situation. Gopal not only accepted the challenge but also thought a way out to succeed it. Dear learners, I hope you enjoyed watching the video, and in case you liked the video, kindly share it with your friends. Thank you.